Have you ever felt a soul-deep connection with someone, only to lose them, not through betrayal, but through timing, silence, or life's quiet cruelty? You meet them, feel something ancient awaken in your chest, something that doesn't come from the mind, but from the body, as if you've known them in other lifetimes. And yet, deep down, you sense the truth. They were never meant to stay. This isn't ordinary heartbreak. It's a sacred fracture, not just of the heart, but of the story you thought your life was becoming. You ask yourself, why would something so fated fall apart so quickly? But maybe it was never about lasting. Maybe it was about opening. Carl Jung believed the most meaningful encounters aren't coincidences. They're orchestrated by the unconscious, drawn from a deeper intelligence within the psyche. These connections are not random. They are sacred interruptions meant to stir the soul. The soul doesn't seek safety. It seeks wholeness. And sometimes, to become whole, we must be broken open. Some loves aren't meant to be homes. They're meant to be thresholds. You pass through them and emerge transformed, more raw, more alive, more yourself. You may have felt it in your body, a jolt in your chest, a deep stillness, a knowing. These people don't come into your life to stay. They come to awaken you, to stir what was buried. And as much as your ego grieves the loss, your deeper self begins to understand. This was never about possession. It was about remembering who you are beneath all you've forgotten. Sometimes you meet someone who brings old wounds to the surface, wounds you thought were healed long ago. You find yourself trembling in places you thought were strong. Not because you're broken, but because something hidden is finally being seen. That's how the soul recognizes the past, not in thoughts, but in raw feeling. They weren't just a lover. They were a mirror, reflecting back parts of you long buried under survival and silence, your longing, your softness, your authentic voice. And though they left, what they awakened in you remains. They didn't complete you. They revealed the truth. Nothing was ever missing, only hidden. Now, the real work begins. Not to hold on to them, but to hold on to what you saw in yourself when you were with them. To become the version of you that surfaced in their light. To tend to what they stirred awake. The ache, the voice, the vulnerability. And when you stay with that ache long enough, something changes. It becomes less about them and more about the self you're becoming. The loss becomes the turning point. The pain becomes the path. And the person you couldn't keep becomes the catalyst for the most sacred transformation of all, the return to yourself. Now, why did they leave? But what did they awaken in me? Maybe it wasn't just heartbreak. Maybe their presence stirred something long buried, the ability to feel again after years of emotional numbness. Maybe they pulled you out of survival mode, out of the version of you that was always managing, always performing, always holding it together. In their presence, something in your nervous system exhaled, because it remembered what it felt like to be seen without trying. But they also triggered something tender. The fear of being too much. The dread of not being enough. Old abandonment wounds rising like smoke. What came alive wasn't just love. It was everything you've carried silently under the surface. Carl Jung once said that when two personalities meet, if there's any reaction, both are transformed. And that's exactly what happened. They didn't just touch your heart. They altered your chemistry. You may have wanted forever, but what they gave you was something stranger, deeper. A mirror, a flare in the dark, a glimpse of a part of you still waiting to be met. Now, the real question isn't about them. It's about who you became when they left. Because not every love comes to stay. Some arrive like a storm, not to soothe, but to shake you loose from the places you've been asleep. Not to offer safety, but to expose truth. And what if you didn't lose something, but were finally freed from something? Freed from the illusion that someone else could complete your story. Freed from the fantasy that love would arrive as a cure. That connection would erase a pain that was never theirs to fix. Maybe the ache isn't a sign of what was lost, but of what was born. Yes, it feels like grief, a death of all the dreams your heart had already begun to live, the mornings that never came, the tenderness that never grew into memory. But this is what soul initiation feels like, not gentle, but sacred, not because it's pleasant, but because it means you truly opened. You loved without guarantee. You allowed your walls to tremble, and in that trembling, something holy was revealed. They weren't your forever. They were your reckoning, a mirror, a question in human form, a soul sent not to give answers, but to break the silence you'd been living in. Who am I when I stop performing for love? What do I want beyond the safety of being chosen? What am I becoming now that this story is ending? You weren't meant to stay who you were. That composed, guided, distant self was ready to be dismantled. And sometimes, the universe sends a person like a storm, just to wash you clean of everything you no longer are. It's tempting to hold on, to hope they'll come back, to believe timing will realign. But the soul doesn't move in circles. It moves in spirals. It deepens. And clinging to the past only keeps you orbiting the fantasy. Now, the real work begins, not to get them back, but to absorb what they awakened, to honor what was stirred, to become the self they briefly helped you remember. They weren't meant to stay. They were meant to awaken you. Not all love stories are meant to last. Some are meant to awaken, to interrupt. You thought you were losing a person, but what you were really losing was a version of yourself. The one who was waiting to be chosen, to be seen, to finally feel whole. And what they gave you wasn't forever. It was ignition. They awakened a you that had been buried beneath years of self-abandonment, silence, and pretending to be okay. Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that are most important." And sometimes, the only person who truly sees those hidden parts in you is the one who can't stay. Their presence cracked you open. They didn't offer closure. They offered transformation. What you call heartbreak might actually be initiation. This is the paradox. Love awakened you, but it didn't stay to complete you. Because it wasn't meant to. It came to show you what still lived inside. Your voice, your hunger, your capacity to ache, to hope, to want truth more than comfort. That was never a mistake. That was a rite of passage. Integration is not about forgetting. It's not about healing back into who you were before. It's about becoming someone wider, braver, a soul reborn from the fire of contact. Just like the phoenix, you don't rise untouched. You rise marked, and that mark is sacred. Maybe you still miss them when a certain song plays, or when the silence gets loud. That's not weakness. It's devotion. Proof you loved deeply. You were willing to open without guarantee. That alone is holy. So don't rush to close the story. Don't try to erase their name from your memory. They weren't meant to be your ending. They were the sacred disruption that brought you back to yourself. And now, You remember. You remember the sound of your own voice, unedited. The rhythm of your breath when you're not chasing approval. You remember that you are the story. That the real love was always yours to claim. Not from them, but from within. This isn't about closure. This is about consecration. Turning pain into poetry, longing into light, and grief into grace. So if you're still aching, good. That means you were brave enough to love in a way that touched eternity. And that love, even in absence, already did its work. You weren't abandoned. You were initiated. And now, you rise.